really great to be here. This is the first virtual summit. I think it's the first of many for many organizations around the world. And I do, as Lisa said, I want to give you a bit of a glimpse into the future. But before I do that, let's take a blast into the past. Okay. I reckon there's some people who would recognize this. So this is probably showing my age, but this is Paul. So this is what computer games look like when I was growing up. This is my stepson, Josh, and he's the one on the left. And he loves computer games. And this is what games look like now on his Xbox. And the thing is, there's still a lot of people who are Pong thinkers in an Xbox world. And especially now, more than ever, because of the way that our world has changed in the last few months, we've got to upgrade our thinking, upgrade our planning, upgrade the way that we look at the future. So as we're moving through crisis to recovery and then to growth, let's look at what we need to do differently. And what I want to share with you are some strategies, some ideas, and some ways of thinking about looking at the future. When Albert Einstein was teaching at Princeton University, he was criticized one year because he gave his students the same exam 2 years in a row. But he said the questions are the same, but the answers are different. Now, look, I'm no Einstein, but I reckon the same thing applies today. So for all of us, we might be asking some of the same questions we've always asked about how do we stay profitable, or how do we manage a supply chain, how do we stay safe when we go outside. But some of the answers might be different. So today, let's look at some of those questions and answers. And you're going to get that not just from me, but from the other fabulous speakers throughout the rest of the day. I want to start by sharing some stories with you. I want to share some success stories. Actually, I want to start with a story that's not so much a success, and then I'll give you 3 success stories. So this story's been around for a while. For the last few years, many people have been asking, why did Kodak fail? So Kodak, at the end of the last century, was one of the most profitable and successful companies on the planet. It had 70% market share in its industry, and it was the 5th most valuable brand in the world, not just in photography, but 5th most valuable brand in the world. And then, less than 2 decades later, it filed for bankruptcy. So why did Kodak fail? Now, you may have heard many stories about it. So some people say Kodak didn't see digital coming. Some people say they had too much invested in their film business, so they couldn't change quickly enough, they couldn't pivot. I even heard the story that a Kodak engineer invented the first digital camera, took it to senior management. They saw how much of a threat it would be to their business, and they said, take this away, never show this to anybody else, because this would destroy your business. That's not true. So Kodak failed, but for a reason that's related to that last one. So it's true that they invented the first digital camera. It's true that the engineer who invented it took it to senior management, and it's true that senior management looked at it, but that at the time, as you can imagine, digital cameras were a bit clunky. It took a long time to develop a photo. The photos were very grainy, and the quality just wasn't as good. And senior management said, yeah, this is okay, but it's not something we're interested in because it's just rubbish compared to what we can do with film. Kodak didn't see the acceleration in growth, the exponential growth of digital. And as a result of that, they failed. But I'm not here to tell you about Kodak. My first success story is about one of Kodak's competitors, and that's Fuji. So Fuji at the time was a Kodak competitor and is still around now. And they did things slightly differently. So in the 1980s, they had this 3-part strategy. So number one, try and get as much as we can from film, which is our cash cow at the moment, squeeze as much of that as we can as possible. Good, so keep doing it, but also prepare for the switch to digital and diversify. So they decided we're going to go into other product lines as well. And if you look at Fuji now, it's still working in photography and print, obviously not doing film, but still servicing the photography and print industries, but they've moved into other areas. So they've got a cosmetics line, they've got a chemical line, they've moved into pharmaceutical, and they're actually right now testing out and developing a COVID-19 drug. So Fuji succeeded where Kodak failed because they realized that they needed to switch. Second success story, Netflix. How did Netflix evolve? So Netflix, when it started, was competing with Blockbuster. And Netflix looked at its customers and said, what are the things that customers customers don't like returning videos to the video store after they finish watching them, and they don't like paying late fees. So Netflix said, let's change that. And what they did was they created a DVD. So we know this now, Netflix, as an online media streaming company, but it didn't start off that way. It started off, they created a DVD home delivery service. So they didn't do videos because videos were heavier, so they're more expensive in terms of postage, but they offered free postage. So you could order a DVD and then it arrived and it came with a reply paid postage pack. You pop the DVD in, send it back, and Netflix solved that problem that the customers had. But they didn't stop there. So when people started getting faster internet access, they realized that they could download content from the internet instead of using DVDs. So Netflix they got rid of their DVD service and started offering online subscriptions. In fact, it started off as you pay per movie, and then the people got more comfortable with paying for subscriptions. And Netflix said, oh, we'll just like all you can watch in a month. Now, the movie companies loved that because it gave them another opportunity to license their content elsewhere. So they were making another income stream. But after a while, they realized that Netflix was going to become a competitor for them. They were taking away too much of their other income. So the movie companies and TV production companies stopped licensing their content to Netflix. So Netflix said, let's set up a movie company. And now they have one of the world's largest, or one of Hollywood's largest movie studios, and they're creating their own content. So Netflix didn't say, let's create a faster DVD delivery service. They looked at what was happening out in the world and they adapted. Okay, success story number 3. This happened very recently. This is a Star Hotel in Sweden. So in Sweden, they didn't have as strict a lockdown as we have had in Australia and other parts of the world, but still the economy has struggled, especially in hospitality and tourism and the food, cafes and restaurants. So this is a hotel in Sweden that had empty rooms because they just weren't having travelers. And what they did was they looked around and said, we're not going to have travelers for a while, but what are people looking for? And what people want is that people still want to go out if they can occasionally, but they want to be safe. They want the physical distancing or social distancing. So the Start Hotel started offering private dining in their hotel room. So if you want to go out for a meal with your partner or your family or your household, but you want to do it in a safe environment, you can book one of the hotel rooms for 3 hours and then order food from the restaurant downstairs. So they changed their view. They said, we're not only going to do accommodation now for the moment, because this is what people want, we're going to pivot and become a fine dining restaurant. Okay, so those are 3 examples of businesses that succeeded, and they succeeded not despite change, but because of change, and they made change work for them. So I want to broadly talk about 3 things today as we're looking at the future. And number 1, how do you scan wider? So how do you look further ahead and also further out from what you've always done? We're going to spend a little bit of time on decision making. So how do you make better decisions even in an uncertain future? And the third thing I want to do is just very briefly talk about then how do you integrate that into your business. And it's very much about mindset. It's about going from that Pong thinking to that Xbox thinking. Okay, quick quiz question for you, and you can just answer this in your head. Here are 4 companies. What do these 4 companies have in common? So we've got Groupon, which is in Australia as well, but of course Groupon more popular in Australia, but they're the vouchers. Below that is Slack. So one of the world's most fastest growing companies. It's a communication tool that is supposed to eliminate email. Uber, we all know, and then there's WhatsApp. That's one of the online communication companies. So what do these 4 things have in common? And when I speak with leadership teams and I run workshops about this and I ask them, what do these 4 companies have in common? They say things like they're all digital, they're all rely on connectivity. And I asked a group recently, and one of them said, this is the thing that a Generation Z can't live without. And so all of those things might be true, but there's one other thing that these 4 companies have in common. And it's this, that all 4 of them started during the global financial crisis, during the GFC, And in the US, like so Australia, we managed to avoid the worst of the GFC. In the US, they don't even call it the GFC, they call it the Great Recession. So these four companies started in their Great Recession. Now, I'm not saying this to you to motivate you to say, if they can do it, anyone can. That's not my point. My point is this, that when things are changing and when things are being disrupted as they are now, it actually creates opportunities. It's hard when things are going well, when things are stable, when everyone is kind of on the same track. It's harder for disruptors to come in. They still do, but it's easier when everything is shaken up. So there's some real opportunities here for us as we're going through on the road to recovery. So what does this mean for us as we're moving forward? I want to share with you a process called scenario planning. Now, I'm not going to go through it in a lot of depth. Scenario planning is an idea that was started at Shell in the 1980s. So Shell put a few guys, literally put 3 guys in a room and said, do some research into the future and tell us what the future is going to look like. So these 3 guys went away and they did whatever research they could, and they looked at different scenarios. So what if there's war in the Middle East? What if Jimmy Carter becomes elected president? What if the OPEC countries put a squeeze on supply? What sort of things would that mean for the world, and what would that mean for Shell? And then they took those ideas to senior management and they laid them out. And they said, here are the possibilities, here's how likely each of them are. And the management said, that's great, which of these is going to happen? And they said, no, that's not the way this works. It's not about which is going to happen. These are multiple scenarios. We've given you some idea about which ones are the most plausible, but now it's up to you to pick which one's going to be a plan A, but also have a plan B and C as backup. So scenario planning, it just comes down to 2 things. You try and figure out what could happen, and then as a result of that, what will you do? So this is something that we're all doing. It's part of the planning that we're all doing now as we're looking at the future. And we're looking at what could happen and then what will you do. As you do this, just one warning that you don't have to create the perfect plan for the future. Why? Because we actually don't know what's coming up in our future. So as a metaphor, if you're thinking about your planning as you're moving ahead from now, it might be at the moment, everything's broken and we don't exactly know what the future is going to hold. So it might be like this little kid's drawing. And that's okay. You want to get better than that, but you don't have to create a masterpiece. You don't have to create a masterpiece. You're not trying to create the perfect plan because we don't know what the future holds. So the perfect plan doesn't exist. What we're trying to do is create something in the middle that'll get us going. But like the scenario planning, you have plan A and you have plan B and C as backup plans, which are then you can then fall back on if things change. And things are changing rapidly. Things are and they will continue to change rapidly for the next 12 months or so. Let's look at this first area, which is scanning wide. And when I mean wide, I mean looking further as well as looking at other industries, other countries, other technology, and what are the things that are going to have an effect on us in the future. Okay, so I've got this little puzzle here because I like to make my presentations interactive. So here's a puzzle, and it's a puzzle with 4 cards. So let me explain what the cards are. So all the cards have a color on the back. So you can see a red and a yellow, and all the cards have a picture on the front. So you can see a fish and a dragon. And I'm going to make this statement here, that every red-backed card has a dragon on the front. And I'd like you to tell me whether this is true or false. Now, some of you will already have figured out that there isn't enough information to be able to tell me for sure whether this is true or false. You need to guess. Okay, so unless you turn over some of the cards, I'm going to let you turn over as many of the cards as you want to. Now, obviously, if you turn them all over, you'll be able to tell me for sure whether it's true or false. But you can tell you now, you don't need to turn them all over. Okay, so just a few seconds to think about which cards must you turn over to be able to tell me for sure whether this is true or false. And by the way, if you're using the chat and you want to share your answers there, you can do that, but it's okay. You don't need to do that. You can just do that in your head. I'll just give you a few seconds to think about it. Okay, so again, you don't need to turn over all 4 cards. You can turn over just 1 or 2 or 3, definitely fewer than 4. Which cards do you need to turn over? Okay, let me share them with you. Let me share the results. Okay, so let me show you the easy one first. Okay, so you definitely need to turn over card number 1, right? You can see there's a dragon on the other side. That's an easy one. And the other easy one is, of course, number 3. You don't need to turn over number 3 because it's got a yellow back, so it doesn't really matter what's on the other side. And you also don't need to turn over number 4 because if it's red on the back, then it actually doesn't give you any extra information. And if it's not, if it's some other color, like yellow or blue or whatever, then it becomes like card number 3. You do need to turn over number 2 because if it's red on the back, then the statement's false. Okay, so here's the answer. It's 1 and 2. Right? So 1 and 2 are the 2 that you need to turn over. And when I ask a number of groups about this, and usually when I ask people to put up their hand, how many people got the right answer, a few people in the room get it right. Most people don't. Here's why. Most people get number 1, but they don't get 2 because there's no red, there's no back, and there's no dragon. And when we're looking at our future, I think we're going to have 2 kinds of future, just like this. So one is the future that we can see, like number 1, that we can see what's coming up in the future. It may be challenging, it may be complex, but at least we can see what we're heading towards so we can create a plan for it. But the other kind of future is a future that you can't see, like number 2. And that's why we need to be flexible and agile and have backup plans so we can switch, because we still need to be able to plan for a future that we can't see. So let's have a look at what that future might look like. And I don't have a crystal ball, but I can't tell you exactly. But if you're looking at scan and wide, let's have a look at what the next 12 months might look like. And then let's look at what some of the other technology and other influences might be. It's just a pandemic that's going to affect us in the future. And also, let's have a look at what customers and consumers are going to be doing differently as we come out on this road to recovery and growth. Okay, so let's start off by looking at the next 12 months. So what can we expect in the next 12 months? So this, you may be sick of hearing the word unprecedented as we're talking about what's happened to us and what we're going through at the moment. And it's not completely unprecedented. We have had crises like this before. So we can look past to see what the future might look like. So let's look at the GFC, because the GFC, as I said, Australia didn't get affected too badly, but a lot of the rest of the world did. The good news is that for food, agricultural trade globally is strong and continue to be strong. So this green bit here is when the GFC hit, and there was about a 3% dip in global GDP, but agricultural trade kept growing slightly slower, but kept growing. And we can look back at what happened in Christchurch in 2011 when they had the earthquake. Again, there was a crisis there. And if you're looking here at retail sales, and retail sales took a big dip in Christchurch. And I know there's some of our Kiwi friends here who would know what happened at the time and maybe have visited New Zealand. People like I have visited New Zealand since then, so you know what that has done to retail. And it took about 12 months before that flattened out again, got back to where it was. Similar thing happened when we had another pandemic. We had the MERS pandemic, and we're looking at just South Korea as an example. Again, there's a big dip in retail sales when the crisis hit, but it took about a year to recover from that. So all the smart money seems to be on the idea that we might recover in about a year. Now, a year is a long time for many businesses, but it's not forever. KPMG published a report just last month saying that a good outcome, so not necessarily best case scenario, the reasonably good outcome for Australia is that we have this maybe a 12-month decline in consumer confidence, and as a result of the recession, people are careful about where they're spending their money and so on. But then there'll be a 12-month rise. So that's looking at the next 12 months as to what we might expect in Australia. And there are a number of things that could change that. When we open more of our borders, when we open our international borders, if there happens to be a second wave. So those are things that we can't predict, but the most plausible scenario seems to be this one. So now what could change in terms of what else could happen, apart from, like, we know about the pandemic, but there could be other things that change as well. So I'm going to share this here, then I'm going to share some things around consumers and what consumers are going to do differently. And then we'll stop for some questions. If you've got some questions and you want to type them into the stream, then I'll stop at the end of this section and we'll take some questions as well. Okay, so the Institute for the Future did some research and they identified the top 10 skills that we'll need in the future workforce. So I won't go through them today because that's a different topic, but one of the skills they identified as being really useful for all of us for being fit for the future is a skill called transdisciplinarity. Now, transdisciplinarity simply means being a connector. So you look at things that are happening outside your industry and maybe outside things that you've even thought about, but you see them happening and then you connect them and say, how could this be relevant for me, for my business, for my team, for my organization? Okay, so that's a skill. So let me give you an example from healthcare, and then I'll give you some examples that are happening in the food and beverage industry as well. So let's look at the healthcare example. So you could imagine this scenario happening in the not too distant future when somebody's having a heart attack, a self-driving ambulance would come along to pick them up. Now, it might still need a paramedic in the back because robots aren't good enough to be able to do that job, but the ambulance could be self-driving. Now, you could also imagine a future where all the cars in the road are self-driving. So the big thing is not just that the ambulance drives itself, doesn't need a driver, but it doesn't need emergency flashing lights and siren because all the other cars on the road know to get out of the way because there's an emergency vehicle on the way. Okay, so that's the first thing. Then along the way, there'll be a chip implanted under the patient's skin, and that will transmit data to artificial intelligence software in the cloud that will then do a diagnosis and tell the cardiologist so she's ready when the patient arrives on her doorstep. Also, in the ambulance, there'll be a 3D printer, and it'll print a stent for that patient and that operation so that, again, that's ready for the cardiologist to do the operation and it arrives with the patient. Also, there'll be a drone, and the drone will deliver other equipment and medical supplies that are required for that particular operation, so hospitals don't have to carry inventory with them. Now, all of this technology exists at the moment. It's not connected this way, but it exists. And maybe all of that will become obsolete when we have this. This is robotic nanotechnology surgery. You're having a heart attack, you swallow a pill, and a tiny army of robots goes to work inside you doing the operation. What could possibly go wrong in that scenario, right? But if you think about this and this technology, and if you're working in healthcare and you're a leader in any kind of healthcare along that path, you would be thinking about this sort of technology. And if you're not, you should be thinking about it because this is going to be part of our future. And for all of us as leaders, we're being paid to think about the future and to spend a lot of our time in the future, as much time as we spend in the present and building on the past. Okay, so let's look at some of the things that are affecting the food and beverage industry. And I'm just going to share with you 10 ideas from around the world that might be relevant. And let me just, as we're doing that, let me just do one other thing before that, and that is to recommend that as you look through this list, have the mindset of a possibility thinker. So this is the self-driving cars. They've evolved a lot since then, but when I first was starting to talk about them, they looked like this. And it's about 7 or 8 years ago, I would show this picture to my little niece, Abby, who was about 7 or 8 at the time. And I said, Abs, here's a self-driving car. And her first response to that was, oh, that's kind of cool. And it looks cute because it looks like a face and so on. So that was her first response to it. At the time, when I was showing this sort of picture to adults, their response was, oh, yes, but no, we can't have self-driving cars because people like driving. They'll never be as safe as human drivers. Hackers will break into the car and kidnap my kids on the way to school. And so on. They'll always think about what could go wrong. Whereas Abby, instead of going yes, but, she was going yes, and thinking about possibilities. So where are you on this scale? As you're looking at it, I suggest that the possibility thinkers are the ones who are going to take most advantage of the opportunities that arise. And even if you're not quite there on the yes and end of the scale, at least be somewhere in the middle and going, that's interesting. I wonder what that could mean. Okay, so let me share these just 10 examples of organizations in the food and beverage industry who are doing innovative things, not all because of the pandemic, but because of an uncertain future and an opportunity to disrupt and innovate. As I share these ideas, can I ask you to think about what this might mean for you? And when I say think about it, it doesn't have to be that you take exactly the same idea and think I can make that work for my business or for my team. It might be something completely different that what I show sparks an idea for you. So, for example, I was speaking at a conference in Melbourne last year, working with a group of senior leaders for an energy utility, a power utility, and I shared ideas like this in their industry. And one of them was this idea in Brazil, where they created an app that would help people monitor their power and then feed it back into the grid. And it was an innovative idea. And then afterwards, we broke out into groups and asked people to share them and to come up with their own ideas. And somebody said, oh, the Brazil app idea. Well, I've got an idea. It's got nothing to do with an app and it's not really to do with the grid, but it's blah. And I thought, great. And I said, great, that's really good because it doesn't have to be exactly the same. It might just spark something forward. Okay, so let's have a look at these ideas. And as I go through these ideas, I'll explain them briefly and write down some notes. Write down what you think might be useful for you that you can take away at the end of today and implement in your business. Okay, so the first one is nanotechnology. There's an innovation in the US where they're using nanotechnology sensors to monitor the ripeness of food so they can reduce food waste, so they can make sure that it's used before it becomes overripe. Okay, so that's one simple example of a new technology which has been around for a while, but it's being used in an innovative way. Another example around food waste is in France. There's an app that will allow customers, this is particularly with canteens, that customers can pre-order, and so the canteen can order in advance, and so that they're not wasting food, because then they've got a rough idea of what quantities they're going to need because of the pre-orders. In China, this is one as a result of the pandemic. There's a bubble tea company that had a lot of retail shops around China, but as a result of the pandemic, they had to shut down their shops and put their staff on, lay staff off. But they used Alibaba's e-commerce platform, Taobao, to set up a new product line which they launched online using their selling online. And they partnered with an influencer, a social media influencer, to launch their products online. So they created a brand new channel for their business. In India, there's a lot of talk now, of course, about sustainability around the world. And in India, this company created straws made out of flour. So we're moving away from plastic to paper straws. But this company went a little bit further, and they created flour-based edible straws for their customers. This next one here, a little bit closer to home, Air New Zealand, they've experimented again with edible packaging. They're using edible coffee cups, and they're made out of biscotti. So they've got this in the Air New Zealand lounge in Auckland. They're experimenting with it and even trying it on some of the flights as well. Here's another one. This is using artificial intelligence. And let me just quickly do a quick technology check with Josh. I just want to make sure that my slides are showing Josh, because I see them here at my end. But okay, they're back. Right, okay, I can see that. Great. Sorry about that, folks. Okay, so artificial intelligence. This is an organization an app that uses machine learning and artificial intelligence to kind of look at consumer behavior to predict what customers might be buying in the future and what their taste preferences might be. So machine learning is an area of artificial intelligence that collects lots of data all the time and then makes predictions. So it's the sort of thing that happens in a lot of areas. It's happening in healthcare. So when your Apple Watch can measure your heart rate, can even do ECGs, and that data is being sent back to Apple and to healthcare providers, so that in the future, they'll be able to predict heart attacks and strokes before they occur, just based on the data that is sent back. This is an example that's being used in the food and beverage industry as well. Another example for China, this is an example on factory floors and also in restaurants and in food production facilities where they're using image recognition. So they've got cameras in the roof and they're using image recognition and facial recognition just to look at worker safety and then alert management to potential problems at assembly lines and in restaurants. Just to make sure that people are doing the right sort of things in terms of safety and hygiene, and also collecting all the data so in the future they can optimize and improve the efficiencies of those facilities. Here's another example, blockchain. Blockchain is an interesting thing. This is a limited example first. So this is an example from Switzerland where there's an app that is linking Swiss coffee drinkers all the way back to the farmers who grew the coffee beans. And so it helps in terms of verifying responsible sourcing, ethical practices all the way through the supply chain. And they're planning to offer a new facility on the app where you can actually tip the farmers who produce the coffee that you're now drinking. And the thing I want to say about blockchain is you'll hear a lot about blockchain in the next few years, especially in the context of supply chain. Just be careful about it because there's a lot of hype about blockchain, and blockchain has a lot of potential as well, but sometimes people get fooled by the hype. A lot of what blockchain promises is what I was, as a university student at UWA, University of Western Australia in the 1980s, we were building databases, and a lot of the database technology that we were building at the time is now being repackaged and being called blockchain. So don't fall for it. Don't fall for the hype around blockchain. Blockchain's good, nothing wrong with it, but don't believe it's good just because it's blockchain. Do a little bit of research and find out, is it really solving the problem that we've got? Okay, so this is a little bit of a warning about blockchain. One more example, actually a couple more examples. I'm a chocoholic, as you may have heard earlier, and there's been examples of 3D printing of chocolate. This is an example of a chocolatier in the US that instead of printing chocolate, around Halloween, what they printed were molds for people to make their own chocolate. So they knew that many US families make their own chocolate at Halloween. It's a huge holiday then, of course. And so they 3D printed these Halloween molds that people could buy so that they could make their chocolate at home. And one last example, again, related to sustainability. EVs are quite big, and they're not as big as they could be in Australia, but that could come soon. In Uruguay, one of the problems with electric vehicles is that they're very, very soft, so you can't hear them coming. So there is a danger that people walk out into the street thinking there's no traffic, simply because the electric vehicles are so soft. So what they've done, this company partnered with Toyota in Uruguay, and they just have the vehicle emitting a sound as it's coming along, so it's loud enough for pedestrians to hear, but they've also chosen the frequency of the sound to stimulate plant growth at the same time. Okay, so those are 10 examples, okay? So 10 examples of people doing innovative stuff around the food industry. Now, as I said, it may not be completely relevant to you, but it may spark some ideas. Put them into a video, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of that. We'll send the video out to you. So if you want to go back and look at those 10 again, you'll have them available to you. I want us to stop and see if there's any questions or comments that have come in. Because if they've come in through the street, then I'm happy to answer them here. And otherwise, we'll continue. I'll stop a couple more times as we go for other questions and comments as well. Okay, so don't see anything coming in, but if there are, then let me know. Okay, the gluten-free one is interesting. Yeah, no, I'm on a wide connection. Okay, let's see. Don't see anything else. Okay, let me continue. Okay, so as I said, be a possibility thinker in everything that you're doing. So When you see something coming up in the future, make sure that you think about how can I use this rather than, oh, that would never work for me. So that's the first thing. Second, so I can see, sorry, have we lost? All right, let me get there. Okay, Josh is just trying to adjust the camera here. Let me turn the camera off, Josh, and I'll turn it on again.
Okay, this is the part of the broadcast here where I start taking requests. Girl from Ipanema, we've had one of those. There we are, Gihan. You're back with us.
Yeah, the camera. Let me switch to the better camera, Josh. There we go. Okay, are we back? And we got the slides up.
Do you want to come to me for a minute?
Okay, so Josh, I don't see my slides at this end, but now I do. Okay, good. All right. So let's look at customers. So what do customers want now as a result of going through this pandemic? So things have changed, and I always reckon we should go back to basics. So this is the guy who's the head of Google's global education. And he says that he goes out and talks to school kids, and he says that whenever he talks to a school group, he never asks them, what do you want to be when you grow up? He always asks them, what problem do you want to solve? And I reckon we should all be looking at this and looking at our businesses and looking at the future exact same way. So what problem do you solve? What problem do you solve for your customers, your clients, other people in the supply chain? What problem are you solving for people? And when I say problem, it doesn't only have to be a negative thing. It could also be, given that things have changed, what are people looking for now? Just like Netflix. Netflix, when it changed from video to DVD to streaming, they realized that they had to change to adapt to that new technology out there and to what customers were looking for at the time. So let's have a look at some of the things that are changing in terms of customers and consumers. So one is that as we're coming out of this recovery and moving into growth, there's going to be a little bit of what KPMG calls a celebratory uptick in the economy. People want to go out. They want to enjoy some of the things that they didn't have as a result of the shutdown. This happened in China. So China, of course, was hit first by the pandemic, was the first one that eased restrictions. And the two things that Chinese citizens want to do was go out to restaurants and travel, domestic travel, which is the only one that was feasible at the time. But they were the two things. So they wanted to get out and celebrate. So there is going to be that as we're starting to ease our restrictions. The other thing that people are doing is that there are more people who have become comfortable with buying online. So the people who've never bought online before who have now become comfortable with doing it. They've done it because they needed to, because they were at home, or they were worried about going out. So that's another thing that consumer sentiment has changed. And it doesn't mean they'll go completely to buying online, but there are people who've never bought online before who are doing it now. And I reckon if you've got a business that is selling products and you can sell online, then set up an online shop. It used to be really expensive to do that, but now it's not anymore. And you should create that extra channel because there will be a new market for you of people who are willing to buy online. And also it goes beyond just the buying. So people also want to engage online. This is a chocolate company in Germany. And what they used to do was they used to have chocolate tasting workshops in their building, in their factory. And of course, with the shutdown, they haven't been able to do that. So now they're doing virtual chocolate tastings. So you might say, well, that's not as good because people don't buy chocolate like at the cellar door. But they've opened up to the international market now. And people want to engage. There's a winery in Western Australia that's done virtual wine tastings. They had 4,000 people internationally attending one of their recent wine tastings, which was done virtually. So some people ordered the wine online beforehand so they could have it. Others were just watching it on a Zoom meeting. So people want to engage online. So how do you make that happen? The next one, of course, is people have found different ways to pay. So people who've never thought before about paying by credit card have started using credit card. They've started using PayWave. They've started using mobile phone payments. They've be happier prepaying before they go in so that there's less contact. And of course, they're doing online payments as well. So again, there's a move towards that. And if you've got the opportunity to offer these alternative payment options, there'll be more customers now who are willing to take advantage of them and use them, and that could increase your business. And it's not just at the retail side either. It's anybody who's got business who can provide those sort of services. Similarly, as a result of the pandemic, the people have done more do-it-yourself at home, but they like to have a little bit of help. So this is an example of HelloFresh, which is an example of you order all your ingredients ready in the right quantities to make a meal, but you still do the cooking yourself. So people want the help. And you don't have to copy exactly what HelloFresh does, but what can you do to make it easier for people to use your products in the way that you'd like them to use it, but with a little bit of help. And there have been lots of examples of people doing video tutorials, online masterclasses, and so on. And that's something that you can offer to create an experience for customers. Of course, there's a push towards going back to supporting local businesses. Here's a really good example of Barossa Fine Foods, which has not only selling online, but they've also partnered with other businesses, and they're allowing them to sell their products online as well. And this is not just a good thing for community reasons, but it's also a really good thing for businesses to create experiences together and to create packages together so that customers get the whole package rather than having to buy individually. And it's all part of this push towards this back towards buy Australian, Australian made. We're looking to rebuild Australian, and there will be a little bit of a push to that in the future. There's been a lot of talk about whether we're going to go to like manufacturing is going to be all brought back onshore. That's not going to happen. There's a lot of talk about that because at the time of a crisis, people tend to get insular and they tend to look inwards and they say, we need to protect ourselves, we're vulnerable, so we need to bring everything inside. It's not really practical to do that, but there will be a little bit of that in terms of supply chains. What will probably happen is that organizations have had a supply chain that's relied very much on just a plan A, especially if it's a global supply chain. They're going to have a plan B and plan C as well. So, and people who deal with them, customers who deal with them, are going to ask, what's your risk management strategy? So what's your plan B and your plan C? So have those in place. Okay, so we had a look at this first area, which is about scanning wide, and now I want to look at narrowing it down and making better decisions. So how do you do some decision making? I want to check if there are any questions that have come in. So I've been just checking if anyone's posted it in the chat box here, and I don't want to jump into I'm not sure I want to jump into the stream, Josh, because that might be the problem with the video. Should we try it again? Yeah, let me bring that up. Let me bring that up. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that's and it's all part of that trend towards saying that we want to. This is a trend that's happened pre-pandemic as well. So there's been a big push towards this. So KPMG every year for the last 3 years has done a survey of Australian CEOs, and they said, what are your 10 top biggest issues? And sustainability has come into the list for the first time at the start of this year. This is pre-pandemic, but definitely sustainability is a trend that's going to be very important for us in the future. Okay, can't see any others, Josh. I'm going to just switch to video. Let's see if we have the same. Oh, okay, we're into orange again, I think.
Okay, don't forget, ladies and gents, if you do have questions, please click to the right of your screen. We are interactive. Hi, Gihan. We are interactive. Please make sure you get some questions through to Gihan on any subject at all. Well, actually not any subject, mainly relating to his talk. I think that would be good. Send your questions through.
Great, Amanda. I'm going to ask you to join in this next segment, Amanda.
Oh, cool. Excellent.
Just be ready for that. Okay, so let me put because we're looking at decision making here. So I've got another little exercise for you. And this is around how you make decisions in an uncertain future. So Amanda, I want to give you a copy of my book, Disruption by Design. And before you say yes, I'd love a copy of the book. Tell you to work a little bit for it, right? So there's a little work involved to get it, but it's not difficult. So first of all, I'm going to ask you, are you willing to play?
Of course, Gihan.
And the correct answer is yes.
Yes. Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Right. Excellent. Okay, so here's how it's going to work. So I've got the book, and I've put it in one of three boxes. It's either in box 1, box 2, or box 3. So I'm going to give you 2 chances to guess which box it's in. I'm going to do it in a very specific way. So first of all, have a guess. Which box, 1, 2, or 3, do you think that my book, this fabulous book, is in?
Would that be your fabulous book, Disruption by Design? Is that the fabulous book? Yes. Box number 2, I'd like to. I feel like I'm playing Ford Super Quiz. Box number 2, thanks, Gihan.
Okay, so Amanda reckons it's in box number 2. I can tell you, Amanda, that it's not in box number 1. So let's eliminate 1. You think it's in 2. This is your second opportunity. Do you want to stay with your original choice of 2, or do you want to switch to 3?
But didn't you just tell me it's not in 2?
I don't know. No, it might be in 2, but what I'm saying is it's not in 1.
Oh, it's not in 1. Oh, no, I'll stay with 2. I'm comfortable with 2.
So before I tell you which one it's in, it's not in 1. You've picked 2, but I'm giving you the choice to switch to 3 if you want to.
I'm happy to stay where I am, Gihan.
Yeah, okay. You're happy? Okay, so, and I've asked groups around Australia this question, and most people are like you, Amanda, they say they stay where they are. Can I ask, Amanda, why you chose to stay with 2?
I just felt like it was a real red hot chance of me winning big prizes today on the interactive quiz.
Which is true, because you've been such a good sport. I'm going to give it to you anyway, regardless of what it's in, so you know that now. Actually, so if you had switched, then you would have won, because it actually was in box 3. Okay, so that's okay. I'm going to give it to you anyway. So thanks for playing, Amanda. So let me explain how this works, right? So obviously, there's some element of chance in this. So Amanda could have got it right. It could have been in box 2, and she stayed in box 2 and it was right. So there's no guaranteed strategy to get it right 100% of the time. But the mathematics shows that if you switch, you're twice as likely to win as if you stay with your original choice. And most people, they stay with their original choice. So let me explain that to you. And I think the easiest way to explain it is to say that it could be in any of the 3 boxes. So Amanda chose box 2. Now, if it was in box 2, and so if she stays with her original choice, there's no question about it. She's got a 1 in 3 chance of winning. Okay, I don't think anyone would argue with that. It's a random choice to start with. If she stays with whatever her choice is, then even the fact that I've taken away a box makes a difference, because it's still 1 in 3 that you got that and she stayed with it. But what if she switches? So she said box 2. If it had been in box 2 and says she switched away from it, she loses. Okay, but if it's in box 3, which it was, and I said, okay, Amanda, I'm going to eliminate box 1, then switching wins, because it switches from box 2 to 3. If it was in box 1 and Amanda had chosen 2, which she did, I would have to eliminate box 3, and again, switching wins. So 2 out of 3 times, switching wins, and 1 out of 3 times, switching loses. So switching is twice as likely to win as staying. the saying is always 1 out of 3. Okay, so if you didn't quite get that logic, then do a Google search for the Monty Hall problem. So the Monty Hall problem, Monty Hall was a game show host in the 1950s in the US. And like he didn't have fabulous prizes like the book Disruption by Design to give away. He used to give away every week a car. Okay, so he'd have his show, studio audience, somebody with the lucky person get the chance to come up on stage and get these 3 doors. And behind one of them was a car and the other 2 were empty. And he went through exactly the same thing. So he got the volunteer up and they said they picked a door, and before he opened the door, he'd open up an empty door and then say, do you want to switch? Now, this is not before social media, folks. This was a famous game show, and people were writing into the newspapers explaining the Monty Hall problem. Mathematicians were writing in saying, you should switch because you're twice as likely to win. And yet, most people, when they had the choice, they would stay for one of 2 reasons. So one is they thought, well, I made my decision, it's not going to make a difference. Or they thought, what if I actually picked the car and I switched away from it? I'd really regret that for the rest of my life. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because as we're looking at our future, we're going to have to make decisions now, but be willing to switch if things change. So what Monty Hall did by opening an empty door, and what I did by eliminating an empty box, was actually to improve your chances. I gave you more information. So we're going to be in this situation where we're going to have new information coming in, and we need to be able to switch when that new information comes in, rather than digging our heads in and saying, this is what we've done in the past, so we're going to continue doing that. By the way, I want to give, not just Amanda, but I want to give you all a copy of my book, Disruption by Design, courtesy of Food Essay. And so if you'd like to get a copy, very easy, just send a text to this number on the screen. And in the text, just put your name and email address, and you'll be able to download a full copy of the book, Disruption by Design, because some of the ideas I've talked about here are just at a very high level, but the book gives you some really practical strategies for how to be innovative and disruptive as we're moving into our future. Okay, so that's it with compliments of me and Food Essay. You don't need to do that straight away, so if you just want to make a note of the number or take a snapshot now, you can do that, or you can do that straight away. That's the first thing I want to share on decision making. We have to be willing to change our decisions when things change around us. Now, that might sound obvious, but many people are stuck in what's called confirmation bias, which means that when we make a decision, and then we only find the evidence that confirms that decision, and we're not willing to look for things that might make our decision wrong. So if you think that you might be vulnerable to confirmation bias, here's a strategy that you can use. It's called ooching. So ooching is a term from sailing. When there's very low wind, what you do, and you're not sure what to do, what you do is you try something, and see what happens. And based on that, you try another little thing and see what happens. You're not exactly sure what you're doing, but you're just trying little things. Now, ooching doesn't sound very professional. You may want to call it creating a prototype. You may want to call it running a pilot project. Many organizations now have done design thinking. And design thinking, the idea is start with the customer, figure out their problems, and then plan a solution to it, regardless of what you're selling. Plan how you're going to solve their problems, and then try it out first. Before you change your whole business model, try this out first. If you've done any work in lean and agile, then this is the same idea in the lean startup, is you create a minimum viable product, or minimum viable service. What can you do to try out in the market and then get some feedback and then figure out what to do? This is how app developers work. They create an app, they publish it on the App Store, and then they wait to see what their users say. And based on that, they make some changes and they republish it the next day. We've kind of taken that for granted now when we're talking about things like apps, but we don't do enough ooching in our regular business life. And it's a thing that you should do. And the last strategy I want to share with you around decision making is about getting out of the present and taking a future perspective. And it's a very simple strategy, but it's very powerful if you try it. So when I explain it to you, don't throw it away because you think this is too simplistic. So the idea is that here we are now, today, and we're looking at what's around us right now. But imagine looking at our short term, medium term, and long-term future. And you can make up what the numbers apply to you for short-term, medium, and long-term. But let's say 10 weeks from now, 10 months from now, and 10 years from now. So the short, medium, long-term. And what you do is you, in your imagination, step yourself into those 3 time frames. So let's say, imagine yourself 10 months from now, looking back to today and saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so grateful for the decisions you made 10 months ago and the actions that you took that brought us to where we are now. Now you say, what were those decisions? What were those actions? First of all, it gets you out of the current situation, and then it lets you start moving forward because it puts you into that future. So it's a really powerful tool. If you haven't used it ever before, try it. It doesn't take very long to do. And if you've got a team, then do this with your team as well. Get them all to do this exercise, and they can all share the actions and decisions that you need to make today, so your 10-month older you can be really grateful. So the last area before I finish up is to make things happen. So how do you take action? And it's coming back to, I want to come back to something I said right at the start about Pong thinkers and Xbox thinkers. It's all about your mindset. So this area here is, I don't like everyone's going to have different actions that they're going to use when they move forward. But have you got the right mindset to be ready for the future? And Howard Gardner wrote this book, 5 Minutes for the Future. You may have come across Howard Gardner before. He did the work around multiple intelligences. But he also wrote this book about 5 minds for the future. I like to think of it as 5 mindsets, because it's not saying that you've got mind 1 and somebody else has got mind 4. It's saying that we should all have a combination of these 5 mindsets as we're thinking about the future. So let me explain what they are. And then I'd like, as I do that, reflect on which of these mindsets do you have individually, and which of them do you have in your team that you could draw on and maybe not draw on at the moment. So the first one, I don't like the term, he calls it a disciplined mind. Discipline sounds like you've got to be right, focused and determined. He's talking about the discipline, your area of expertise. What did you learn? What did you learn from school, from TAFE, from uni, from your qualifications? What have you learned, and are you continuing to learn? So are you just resting what you've already learned, or do you continue to have education in your discipline, in your area of expertise? That's the first thing. So continue learning in your area of expertise. The second one is the connector mind. This is the transdisciplinarity. This is the mind that can see 2 ideas from different areas and connect them to make something new, the synthesizing mind. Is a creative mind. These are the people who can just get ideas out of anywhere. It's a part of your brain that's actually creative. And we've got it. It's just that you notice it more in some people than others. So both of those 2 are creative, are about creativity. And I can say, I don't mind admitting that for me, the creative mind is not so great. So I'm not so good at just creating ideas out of nowhere, but my synthesizing mind is really good. I'm really good at seeing an idea in healthcare and saying this applies in the food industry, or this applies to financial services, or we can use this. Now we start looking at other people. The respectful mind is looking at the people that you're engaging with, your team members, your customers. How do we deal with our customers? How do we deal with suppliers? How do we deal with the community as they're also coming out of this pandemic on the road to recovery? So it's looking at the people that you're directly connected with. And then the last one, which is the ethical mind, is looking at the big picture. So this is where sustainability is important. This is looking at what are the global impacts of what we're doing. What's this going to mean for our grandchildren and their grandchildren? What is the social justice movement that's really rising up now? What's that going to mean for Indigenous communities in the future? How are we going to create a business that's not only going to be profitable again, but is also going to be sustainable for generations to come? That's the ethical mind. Okay? So which of those 5 minds do you have, and which of those 5 minds do you need? And you might find that you've already got them among your team members. So we talked about these 3 things. We talked about scanning and looking wider and further. We talked about you doing a little, getting better at making decisions so that you can narrow down the multiple scenarios that you create to make decisions, and make decisions even in an uncertain future. And then how do you build this into your team? have the right mindset for that. Just before I finish off, there's a quotation that I share at the end of many of my presentations, which is attributed to Benjamin Brewster. And he said, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is. So if you've heard some good ideas this morning and you hear some good ideas throughout the day, absolutely make note of them, write them down, and have that as an action plan. But until you put them into practice, you won't know how useful they are. And as I said, the way to do it is by ooching first, try things out. But until you put them into practice, you won't know how well they'll work for you in your situation. If you haven't already made a note of this number, please do this. I'd love you to get a copy of the book, and there's some great ideas in there for some really practical things that you can do as we're facing the disruption, we're facing recovery, and as you're moving into growth. My last message to you is this. Don't wait for all the ducks to be lined up in a row. Don't wait for everything to be perfect to take action. Start before you're ready, because the world isn't going to wait for you. Competition's not going to wait for you. Your team isn't going to wait for you. Get going now, and that's the best way to be fit for the future. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the summit as well.
Thank you. There we are. Well done. Thank you, Gihan. Fantastic to have you with us here today. That was absolutely wonderful, and thank you so much for passing on a copy of your excellent book. Look forward to reading it, and thank you also for introducing ooching to me. New favourite word. Thank you, Gihan. We'll let you get on with the rest of your day, and please connect with Gihan if you would like to, and there's a whole raft of things on his website that I'm sure you'll find interesting, which is gihanperera.com. You can go to that website as well. Bye, Gihan. We're all waving at you. See you later. Thank you so much.